So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me indeed to be with you again. As you can see, I'm not Italian, so I apologize. I have to speak English. But it's great to be here in Venice, despite the rain. But back in Brussels, we also have a lot of rain, so it's okay. What I would like to do indeed is to give you an update on what is happening in Brussels. And I think all of you in the room know that the European Union, the European Commission, over the last years took a strong interest in the textile industry, in trying to develop a new business model, in trying to set up a new set of rules, how we are organized, how we are producing our products, how we are going forward. So what I will do is, on the one hand, give you a quick update on where do we stand in this regulatory vague avalanche, some people call it. Where do we stand very quickly? But secondly, I also want to share with you what is coming up beyond the current legislation. I hope all of you know that we almost have a new European government with a new Commission, new European Parliament. They are coming up with a lot of new ideas for the next 5 years, which will also have an impact on the textile industry. And so I will try to share very briefly what are those new ideas, in which direction are we going. And then thirdly, I will quickly share a little bit the Euratex, the industry perspective of this big change that is coming. Very, very briefly, for those who would not know about Euratex, I hope everybody knows, but our role is to be the representative, the voice of the entire European textile industry in Brussels. So we are a lobby organization defending, promoting the interests of around 200,000 textile and fashion companies across the EU. You can see the key numbers there, 1.3 million people working in our industry with a joint turnover of around 170 billion euro. So we are, ladies and gentlemen, we are still an important sector of the European economy. And I must add, in this 170 billion, Italy is numero uno, by far. And what we do, again, our main focus is lobby. It's really working with the European regulator, influence the legislation, make sure that whatever happens in Brussels somehow supports the competitiveness of our industry. So it's about legislation, position papers, meeting with Commission officials, but it's also developing projects, helping companies on sustainability, on innovation, on recycled content. So we also run a number of projects. We do communication. We do a lot of networking. So that's kind of the package of Euratex that we work on. And in Italy, for those who would not know, our formal member of Euratex is, of course, Sistema Moda Italia, our president here, very much supporting us in this work. So let's focus on this regulatory kind of initiative. And I hope all of you will know that the main piece, the main document that all of you need to know is this textile strategy, this dedicated EU textile strategy, which was adopted in 2022, around 2 years ago, and which is based on the Green Deal, which is based also on a reflection on industrial competitiveness. But this communication from March 2022 is really the core, is really the basic philosophy of where Europe wants the textile industry to go. Since 2022, we've been very busy in Brussels to translate that vision, a vision about sustainability, a vision about transparency, to translate that vision into regulation. And you can see on this slide a very short summary of ongoing regulatory and legislative work. And there's no time this afternoon to go through each of them, but bear that in mind that we have, here you can see 16 pieces, there are even more. There's a long list of regulation that is being established, that is being developed as we speak in Brussels, that will force you as a textile manufacturer, as a fashion brand, that will force you to run your business in a different way, which much more focus on sustainability, using recycled content, transparency in your supply chain. That is the main point. Again, we are talking about eco-design regulation. We are talking about introducing a digital product passport. We are talking about introducing an extended producer responsibility, an EPR system, also here in Italy. We are talking about due diligence legislation. We are talking about restricting chemicals. But we're also talking about making a deal with South America and the Mercosur Free Trade Agreement. So it's a long list that you can see on the screen, which is all aimed at creating that new regulatory framework. It's a puzzle which is being put together, which will be put together in the next 2-3 years. And again, without going into the details, but our effort as Euratex in this lobby work is to make sure that the pieces of the puzzle fit together, that each of those pieces of legislation kind of come together in a coherent package, and that finally the look of that puzzle is attractive, is supporting the competitiveness of the textile industry. So it's a very complex process with a lot of legislation ongoing, a lot of negotiations between the Commission, the European Parliament, the Member States, the industry, NGOs who are involved in that process. But that is work in progress. So that work is ongoing as we speak. And again, as Euratex, we are working day and night sometimes to influence that process. At the same time, I want to share with you that in Brussels, we start to look beyond the current work. We start to look what will happen in the next 5 years. And as I said, I think everybody knows that we do have a new European Commission being put together. In the next few weeks, there will be the hearings in the Parliament of the new commissioners. We have a new European Parliament. With that new government, with that new European government, they are preparing new plans, new visions, new strategies for the next 5 years. I think you all know Mr. Letta, you all know Mr. Draghi, very famous here in Italy. They have developed some interesting reports about competitiveness, about how can we re-industrialize Europe. These reports have been feeding into Mrs. von der Leyen's work program for the next 5 years. And on this slide, which has a lot of information, I know, but on this slide, you can see some of the highlights, some of the key initiatives which Mrs. von der Leyen would like to take in the next 5 years. And again, we don't have time to go through all of them, but we're talking about completing the single market. We are talking about a new clean industrial deal. 5 years ago, we were talking about a Green Deal. So there is an important shift from Green Deal towards a new clean industrial deal. She has proposed a new Circular Economy Act, which will facilitate, we should promote circularity in the industry. There is a lot of discussion how to develop a new EU industrial strategy. In general terms, Brussels has become, I would say, more aware of the fragility of the European industry. And whereas 5 years ago there was a very strong focus on sustainability, I would say at any cost, today it's, okay, let's be sustainable, but let's also think how we can maintain an industrial base in Europe. So that's a little bit, in very general terms, what we talk about. Also, our relations with the rest of the world, becoming more critical towards China, trying to be more protective of our industrial interests. And again, you can see some of the initiatives that are on the table. As Euratex, of course, we will be working with our members over the next 5 years to see how these ideas, these concepts, are translating again into new rules, into new initiatives, how it will affect the competitiveness of our industry. So, based on all that, my final 2 slides, but they are maybe the more important, is to share with you how do we look upon all this change that is coming. Regulatory change in a big way, different policies, different visions. And I try to summarize in 8 points what are the critical questions that we need to work on. The first, probably most important, is to say that we have a lot of legislation coming, as I showed on this slide, 16 and even more pieces. As Euratex, we maybe surprisingly welcome that legislation, but we insist very much on the quality of the legislation and how that legislation will be implemented and enforced. Regulating the textile industry per se is okay, because it will allow to differentiate between those that are, I would say, doing well, so to speak, and those that are cheating, if I can say. So the enforcement, the control of the legislation inside Europe, and even more so for products coming from outside Europe, will be critically important. Another critical element is what we call the demand side. So a lot of the legislation is focusing on the supply side, on us, the manufacturers. We have to produce better quality. We have to come up with new standards. We have to be more transparent. This is all tackling the manufacturer. We are not putting enough attention on the demand side, on the consumer. Who will buy all those sustainable textiles? The consumer is not able and or willing to pay more for a sustainable product. You have shown it in your studies. So there is, fortunately, with the new Commission, a growing awareness that it's not just about supply, but it's also about the demand side. We are thinking about market pool measures, consumer incentives, VAT systems that will address this imbalance. We need to, it's been mentioned this morning, we need to focus on better cooperation between the brands, the manufacturers, and I would add the consumers. It's a long way, but we hear it in every presentation, and I'm hopeful also today to see brands and manufacturers sitting in the same room, thinking how can we manage that transition together, because alone nobody can manage. So we need to work on that. We have a timing problem, and again I was happy to see the conclusions, Carlo, your number one recommendation on the timing of the legislation. So a lot of legislation is coming, but it's coming in 3, 4, 5 years. Today we have many companies, also in Italy, who invest in sustainability, but they are not rewarded for that investment because the legislation, so the compulsory elements, will only come in 2027, 28. So what do we do in between? So we have a deficit that we need to bridge. So how can we help companies who make the investment today, but who will be rewarded only in 3, 4 years? It's very critical, and we have, unfortunately, in Europe, companies today who close down because of that, because they've invested and they are not yet rewarded. The technology side, scaling up, it's been mentioned, the need for investment. Draghi mentioned a lot in his report. We need much more support, financial support to make that happen. We need to avoid fragmentation of the single market. Also in textiles, when we talk about textile waste, every country has a different definition of textile waste today. So we cannot ship textile waste from one country to another, for example. And then last point, something we are working on very much as Euratex, we need to globalize the EU textile strategy. So we have this great vision in Brussels, future about a sustainable, transparent, high-quality textile industry. If only Europe is going that way forward, we may be in trouble. So we need to convince our partners in China, in the US, in South America, to do the same. And so not just have an EU kind of vision, EU textile strategy, but have the whole world coming with us towards more sustainable textile industry. It is happening step by step, but there's a way to go. So that is my last slide, trying to summarize. A lot of change is coming from a regulatory perspective, from a market perspective. A lot of things are happening also on the technology side. So change is coming. I know it's a buzzword, but as Euratex, we try to accompany our companies. We try to influence the legislation so that in 5 years from now, we will continue to have a strong and vibrant European textile industry. Thank you.
Thank you.